Sarah Connor pressed her palms against the mahogany desk, her voice breaking the midnight silence like shattered glass. "Take me as your mistress, just save my son." Logan Blackwood looked up from his ledger, lamplight catching the silver threading his dark hair. The woman before him swayed with exhaustion, her calico dress torn at the shoulder, dust from the desert road still clinging to her boots. Her green eyes held the wild desperation of a cornered animal. He set down his pen. The grandfather clock in the corner marked the seconds with mechanical precision while he studied her face. High cheekbones, proud jaw, the kind of woman who had never begged for anything in her life. "Mrs. Connor." His voice carried the weight of authority earned through years of controlling men and mountains of silver ore. "You're bleeding." She touched her temple where a thin line of dried blood traced from her hairline to her jaw. She must have fallen during her frantic ride through the darkness. "My son is dying." The words hung in the air like smoke. Logan pushed back his chair and stood, his frame filling the space behind the desk. Through the window, Tombstone stretched below them, a collection of flickering lights against the vast Arizona darkness. "Dr. Watson turned you away." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a crumpled piece of paper. The medical bill fluttered to the desk like a wounded bird. Logan's eyes moved across the figures without expression. "Consumption requires expensive treatment." He moved around the desk, his boots silent on the Persian rug. "The boy needs constant care, medicines from back east. Perhaps specialists from San Francisco. I'll pay whatever you ask." "With what?" The question landed like a physical blow. Sarah's shoulders sagged, and for a moment, the proud mask slipped. Logan saw the truth written in the hollows beneath her eyes, the sharp angles of her face where weight had fallen away. "I have the ranch, the cattle. Arthur left me. Arthur left you nothing." The words cut through her protestations. Logan returned to his desk and opened a different ledger, his fingers tracing down columns of figures. He turned the book toward her. "Your husband mortgaged the ranch to me 6 months before he died. The cattle were sold to pay gambling debts. The land, the house, the barn, everything belongs to me." Sarah stared at the neat handwriting, at Arthur's familiar signature scrawled at the bottom of the loan documents. The numbers blurred as tears gathered in her eyes. "I don't understand. Arthur was a good man who made bad choices." Logan closed the ledger. The poker game started small. A few dollars here and there. But the debts grew like tumbleweeds. After rain, the desert wind rattled the windows, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the sob that threatened to escape. "He never told me. Men rarely do." Logan walked to the window and gazed out at the sleeping town. Most of the buildings below belonged to him in one way or another. The general store, the hotel, half the saloons. Power had a way of accumulating, like dust in the corners of unused rooms. "Your son, John, he's 12? "Yes, without treatment. How long does he have?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Dr. Watson said weeks. Maybe a month if we're fortunate." The clock continued its relentless counting. Logan turned back to face her, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "I can save him." Hope flickered in her eyes like a candle flame in wind. "I can provide the best medical care available. Dr. Watson will have everything he needs. Specialists will come from San Francisco. No expense will be spared. What do you want in return?" Logan moved closer, close enough that she could smell the tobacco and leather that clung to his clothes. His presence filled the room like gathering storm clouds. "You'll live in my house. Attend social functions as my companion. The arrangement continues until your son is completely recovered." "How long?" "Consumption is unpredictable. Months, perhaps years." Sarah closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her lids, she saw John's face, pale and drawn, his small chest struggling with each breath. She saw Arthur's lies crumbling like old newspaper. She saw the empty ranch that had never truly belonged to her. The boy cannot know the truth of our arrangement. She opened her eyes. Logan stood before her, solid and immovable as the mountains that surrounded the territory. If you try to leave before he's fully recovered, I'll call in every debt Arthur owed. You'll lose everything, including your ability to care for your son. The ultimatum settled between them like desert dust. Sarah straightened her shoulders, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. I understand. Logan moved to his desk and withdrew a sheet of paper. His pen scratched across the surface, drafting terms that would bind her future to his will. The sound echoed in the silence like footsteps on a grave. He turned the document toward her. Sign here. Sarah took the pen, her fingers stiff with cold and fear. The ink flowed across the paper, sealing her fate. With fluid strokes, her signature looked foreign beneath the harsh terms, like a name belonging to someone else entirely. Logan blotted the ink and folded the paper into his vest pocket. Mrs. Danvers will prepare rooms for you and the boy. Dr. Watson will begin treatment tomorrow. Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, entered into a bargain that would reshape the very foundations of her life. The desert wind continued its lonely song outside the window, carrying with it the promise of change and the weight of choices that could not be undone. Dawnlight filtered through curtains that cost more than Sarah's ranch had earned in a year. She stood in the doorway of John's new room, watching her son sleep in a bed carved from imported walnut. His breathing came easier now, the rattling cough that had haunted their nights reduced to occasional whispers. Mrs. Danvers appeared beside her, silent as smoke. The housekeeper's gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her black dress buttoned to the throat. She carried a breakfast tray with the precision of a funeral director handling flowers. The boy needs to eat. Her voice held the warmth of winter stones. Dr. Watson's orders. Sarah nodded, stepping aside. The housekeeper moved into the room without acknowledging her further. The message was clear. In this house, Sarah occupied a space between guest and servant, neither fully welcome nor entirely dismissed. The mansion stretched around them like a monument to wealth carved from desert rock. Persian rugs covered polished floors. Oil paintings in golden frames depicted landscapes Sarah had never seen. Every surface gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that required an army of hands to maintain. Logan emerged from his study as Sarah descended the main staircase. He wore a black suit that made his shoulders appear broader, his presence more commanding. His eyes swept over her borrowed dress, one of several Mrs. Danvers had provided from some mysterious source. The boy looks better. Dr. Watson says the medicines are helping. Sarah's fingers found the fabric of her skirt, smoothing wrinkles that weren't there. John asked when we can go home. What did you tell him? That the ranch needs repairs. That we're guests here until everything is fixed. Logan's expression remained unreadable. He moved toward the dining room, expecting her to follow. The morning ritual had already established itself without discussion. They ate breakfast in silence, the tick of the grandfather clock marking time between bites. Sarah's appetite had become a foreign thing, food turning to sawdust in her mouth. She forced herself to eat, knowing her strength would be tested in ways she couldn't yet imagine. There's a church social this evening. Logan set down his coffee cup. You'll accompany me. The words weren't a request. Sarah's hand tightened around her fork. I don't have appropriate clothes. Mrs. Danvers will see to it. The housekeeper appeared as if summoned by telepathy, her arms laden with fabric the color of midnight blue. The dress was beautiful, expensive, and completely inappropriate for a woman in Sarah's position. It spoke of ownership, of being kept and displayed. I can't wear this. You can and you will. Logan's voice carried the weight of finality. You're my companion now. Act the part. The church social unfolded in the community hall like a carefully orchestrated performance. Ladies in their finest dresses clustered around tables laden with food, their voices rising and falling in practiced harmony. Men gathered near the walls, discussing mining claims and cattle prices while their wives managed the social machinery. Sarah entered on Logan's arm, feeling every eye in the room turn toward them. Conversation stuttered to a halt, then resumed in whispers that buzzed through the air like angry wasps. Elena Vasquez stood near the punch bowl, her dark hair piled high, her dress a defiant shade of red. She owned the largest saloon in town and had never married, facts that gave her a certain freedom other women envied and feared in equal measure. Well. Elena's voice carried across the sudden quiet. Logan Blackwood brings his new pet. To show off, the words struck Sarah like physical blows. Heat flooded her cheeks, but she forced herself to remain still. Logan's hand tightened on her arm. Careful, Elena. Your jealousy is showing. Jealousy? Elena laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. Of what? Being another notch on your bedpost? The gathered crowd held its collective breath. Sarah felt the weight of their stares, the judgment that pressed against her from all sides. She had become a spectacle, a cautionary tale mothers would use to warn their daughters about the consequences of desperation. Logan stepped forward, his presence filling the space between them. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Mrs. Connor is a guest in my home. She deserves the respect due to any lady in this community. The silence stretched like wire about to snap. Elena's eyes flicked between Logan and Sarah, reading meanings in the spaces between words. Of course. Elena's smile held no warmth. How thoughtless of me. The evening crawled past like a wounded animal. Sarah smiled when expected, nodded at appropriate moments, and endured the whispered comments that followed her through the crowd. She was being measured, catalogued, filed away in the mental ledgers these people kept of social transgressions. They returned to the mansion in silence, the carriage wheels grinding against gravel. Sarah stared out at the desert landscape, at the endless expanse of sage and stone that stretched toward mountains she couldn't see in the darkness. You handled yourself well tonight. Logan's voice startled her from her thoughts. She turned, to find him studying her profile in the moonlight. Did I have a choice? There's always a choice. The question is whether you can live with the consequences. The carriage stopped before the mansion's entrance. Logan helped her down, his hand warm against her gloved fingers. For a moment, they stood together in the desert silence, breathing air that tasted of dust and distant rain. Your son asked me about his father today. Sarah's breath caught. What did you tell him? That Arthur was a good man who loved his family. That's what I would have said. I know. They walked toward the house together, their footsteps echoing on the stone path. Inside, the mansion waited with its expensive silence and borrowed comfort, a gilded cage that protected and imprisoned in equal measure. Mrs. Danvers met them at the door, her expression carved from granite. The boy had another coughing fit. Dr. Watson gave him something to help him sleep. Sarah's composure cracked. She moved toward the stairs, toward John's room, but Logan's voice stopped her. Wait. He disappeared into his study and returned with a leather-bound journal. The cover was worn smooth by countless hands, the pages yellowed with age. Medical texts, research on consumption. I've been collecting them for years. Sarah accepted the journal, feeling its weight in her hands. She opened it to find pages covered in careful handwriting, notes and observations written in Logan's precise script. You've been studying this disease. My wife died of consumption. My daughter, too. His voice carried the weight of old grief, carefully contained, but never forgotten. I promised myself I'd never watch it happen again. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Sarah closed the journal, holding it against her chest. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand. This isn't about ownership or control. It's about keeping a promise. Sarah climbed the stairs to John's room, the journal's weight matching the heaviness in her chest. She found her son sleeping peacefully, his breathing steady and deep. The medicines were working, but the cost of his healing was being measured in pieces of her soul. She sat beside his bed, listening to the desert wind that rattled the windows and spoke of storms gathering beyond the horizon. Outside, the territory stretched endlessly into darkness, full of dangers and promises she couldn't yet comprehend. The journal lay open in her lap, its pages filled with the desperate research of a man who had lost everything and refused to let it happen again. In the margin of one page, written in fading ink, she found a single word: hope. The stranger arrived on a Tuesday morning, when the desert wind carried the scent of approaching rain. Sarah watched from John's bedroom window as a man in a fine coat dismounted from a bay horse, his movements fluid and confident. He handed the reins to one of Logan's stable hands with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being served. Vincent Valentine. The name reached her ears through the mansion's walls, carried by servants' whispers and Mrs. Danvers' disapproving sniffs. Logan's former business partner. A man with history written in the tension of his shoulders whenever Logan's name was mentioned. John coughed, drawing her attention back to the bed. The sound was softer now, less violent than the fits that had racked his small body weeks ago. Dr. Watson's treatments were working, but progress came in increments measured by sleepless nights and careful observation. "Mama, who's that man?" Sarah smoothed the blanket over John's chest. "Someone here to see Mr. Blackwood. Is he staying for supper?" "I don't know, sweetheart." But Vincent did stay for supper and breakfast the next morning, and the evening meal that followed. He settled into the mansion's guest quarters with the ease of someone reclaiming familiar territory. His presence changed the house's rhythm, adding discordant notes to the careful harmony Sarah had learned to navigate. She first spoke to him on the third day, when she found him reading in Logan's study. He looked up from the leather-bound book, his blue eyes catching the lamplight. "Mrs. Connor, I was hoping we might have a chance to talk." His voice carried the smooth cadence of education and refinement. Everything about him suggested civilization, from his carefully trimmed beard to the gold watch chain that stretched across his vest. "About what?" "About your situation here." He closed the book and stood, moving with the deliberate grace of a man who understood the power of presence. "I knew your husband, you know. Arthur was a good man who fell into bad circumstances." Sarah's hands found each other, fingers intertwining. "What kind of circumstances?" "The kind that men like Logan Blackwood create." Vincent moved to the window, gazing out at the desert landscape. "He has a talent for putting people in positions where they have no choice but to accept his help. He saved my son's life." Did he, or did he create the conditions that made salvation necessary? The question hung in the air like dust motes in afternoon sunlight. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach, a recognition of possibilities she hadn't wanted to consider. "I don't understand." Vincent turned back to her, his expression gentle but serious. "Arthur didn't start gambling on his own. Someone had to teach him the games, introduce him to the right people, make sure he kept playing even when he started losing." "You're saying Logan orchestrated it." "I'm saying Logan has a pattern. Find a man with something to lose. Create a situation where he loses it. Then offer salvation at a price that keeps him bound forever." Sarah's mind reeled. The carefully constructed narrative of her life began to shift, revealing different shapes in the shadows. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth, and because I might be able to help you escape." That night, Sarah lay awake listening to the desert wind rattle the windows. Vincent's words echoed in her mind, mixing with her own observations and doubts. She had seen Logan's kindness, his genuine concern for John's welfare. But she had also seen his control, the way he commanded every aspect of their lives with quiet authority. The next morning brought disturbing news. John had suffered another coughing fit during the night, worse than any in recent weeks. Dr. Watson arrived with his black bag and grave expression, emerging from the boy's room with instructions for new medications and increased rest. Is he getting worse? Sarah asked, gripping the stair railing. These things have setbacks, Dr. Watson replied. The important thing is not to lose hope. But hope felt as fragile as morning frost on desert. Stones. Sarah watched John sleep, his face pale against the white pillows, and felt the weight of her helplessness pressing down like summer heat. Vincent found her in the garden that afternoon, sitting on a stone bench beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree. He approached slowly, his footsteps soft on the gravel path. I heard about the boy's setback. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. There's something I need to tell you. Something about John. The words carried a weight that made Sarah look up sharply. Vincent's face was serious, his usual confidence replaced by something that might have been regret. Arthur came to me before he died. He was desperate, terrified. He told me things he'd never told anyone else. What kind of things? Vincent sat beside her on the bench, his proximity making her acutely aware of his cologne and the careful way he chose his words. John isn't Arthur's son. The world tilted. Sarah's hands gripped the bench edge as if the earth might fall away beneath her feet. That's impossible. Arthur suspected from the beginning. The timing, certain physical traits, but he loved you both too much to say anything. Vincent's voice was gentle, but his words cut through her like winter wind. I'm John's father, Sarah. The admission hung between them like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm. Sarah's mind raced backward through years of marriage, searching for signs she had missed, clues hidden in plain sight. You're lying, I wish I were. Vincent reached into his coat and withdrew a daguerreotype. The image showed a young man with John's eyes, his stubborn chin, the same way of holding his head when concentrating. This is my brother at 12. Look at it and tell me you don't see the resemblance. Sarah stared at the photograph, her vision blurring. The resemblance was undeniable, written in bone structure and inherited gestures. Arthur knew, he knew, and he was being blackmailed to keep quiet. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Arthur's gambling debts weren't random misfortune. They were payments, desperate attempts to keep Vincent silent about John's parentage. The money Logan lent him, Sarah whispered, was to pay me. Arthur was trying to protect your reputation, John's future. He died working in Logan's mine, trying to earn enough to break free from both of us. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the garden's edge where desert scrub met cultivated lawn. The boundary between wildness and control seemed suddenly significant, a metaphor for choices she didn't understand. Why tell me this now? Because Logan knows too. And because John deserves to know his real father. Vincent approached her slowly, his movements careful as if she were a wild animal that might bolt. I can take you away from here. Both of you. We can be a real family. John is sick. He needs the treatments. I have money, resources. I can provide everything Logan can and more. Sarah turned to face him, seeing her own reflection in his eyes. Two people bound by a secret that had already destroyed one life. What do you want in return? Nothing. Just the chance to be the father I should have been from the beginning. But there was something in his expression, a hunger that had nothing to do with paternal love. Sarah felt the familiar chill of being trapped, of having her choices shaped by forces beyond her control. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the first promise of the storm that had been building all day. Sarah looked back at the mansion, at the window where John lay sleeping, and felt the weight of impossible decisions pressing down like the approaching weather. Vincent stood beside her, waiting for an answer that would reshape all their lives. In the distance, Logan's silhouette appeared in his study window, watching them with unreadable intensity. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the scent of rain that might never come. Sarah found Logan in his study as thunder shook the mansion's windows. Rain had finally come to the desert, turning dust to mud and filling the air with the scent of wet earth. He stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid beneath his white shirt. "You spoke with Vincent." It wasn't a question. Logan's voice carried the weight of a man who had seen this moment approaching from a great distance. "He told me about John, about Arthur's debts." Logan turned slowly, his face etched with lines that seemed deeper in the lamplight. "And you believe him?" "I don't know what to believe anymore." The admission hung between them like the storm. Outside, full of electricity and the promise of destruction. Sarah stepped into the room, her bare feet silent on the Persian rug. "Tell me the truth, all of it." Logan moved to his desk, his fingers tracing the leather-bound ledger that contained so many secrets. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Arthur came to me desperate. Not for gambling money, but for protection. Vincent was bleeding him dry, demanding payment for his silence about John's parentage." Sarah's breath caught. "You knew." "I suspected." Arthur was too honorable to voice his doubts, but they were written in every line of his face when he looked at the boy. "So you helped him." "I tried to. I offered Arthur work, honest wages that might have eventually freed him from Vincent's hold. But Vincent raised the stakes, demanded more money, faster payments." Logan's hands clenched into fists. "Arthur died trying to meet an impossible deadline. He was working double shifts in the mine, pushing himself beyond human limits." The truth settled over Sarah like desert sand, filling the spaces between her ribs until breathing became difficult. She had been wrong about so many things. Seen predators where there were protectors and salvation where there was only manipulation. "Vincent's been lying to me. Vincent's been lying to everyone, including himself." A crash of thunder punctuated his words, followed by the sound of rapid footsteps on the stairs. Mrs. Danvers appeared in the doorway, her usually composed face tight with concern. "It's the boy. He's having trouble breathing." Sarah ran. The hallway stretched endlessly before her, each step echoing like gunshots in the storm's fury. She burst into John's room to find him sitting up in bed, his face pale and drawn, each breath a visible struggle. Dr. Watson was already there, his black bag open on the bedside table. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking John's pulse, listening to his chest with the stethoscope. When did this start? Sarah knelt beside the bed, taking John's small hand in hers. "About an hour ago." Dr. Watson's voice was carefully neutral, but Sarah heard the concern beneath his professional calm. His breathing became labored, then this coughing fit began. John's eyes found hers, wide with the fear of a child who understood that something was terribly wrong. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead, her touch gentle despite the trembling in her hands. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're going to be fine." But even as she spoke the words, doubt crept into her voice. John's condition had been improving steadily. This sudden relapse made no sense. "Unless, Doctor." Logan's voice cut through the room's tension. "I need to speak with you, privately." The two men stepped into the hallway, their voices low but urgent. Sarah caught fragments of their conversation through the partially open door. Words that made her blood run cold. Sabotage, interference, deliberate manipulation of medications. She looked down at John, at his trusting face and labored breathing, and felt rage build in her chest like a gathering storm. Vincent had been manipulating her son's treatment, keeping him sick to maintain leverage over her decisions. The realization hit her with the force of lightning. Every setback, every mysterious worsening of John's condition, had coincided with Vincent's presence in the house. He had been playing with her child's life as if it were a poker hand, calculating odds and manipulating outcomes. Sarah stood, her movement sharp and decisive. She found Vincent in the library, calmly reading by the fire as if children weren't fighting for breath in the rooms above. "You've been interfering with John's treatment." Vincent looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to something that might have been admiration. "You're more perceptive than I gave you credit for. He's your son. How could you use his illness against him? He's not really sick anymore." Vincent closed the book and set it aside. A few drops of the right substance in his evening milk, and the symptoms return. Harmless, but convincing. Sarah's vision blurred with fury. "You've been poisoning him. I've been motivating you." Sometimes people need help seeing their best options. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Sarah felt something fundamental shift inside her, a recognition of evil that wore the mask of paternal concern. "You're not taking us anywhere." Vincent stood, his movement fluid and confident. "I think you'll find that you don't have a choice. I am John's biological father. I have rights. Rights you forfeited when you chose to blackmail Arthur and poison your own child. Prove it." The challenge hung between them like a blade. Vincent's smile was cold, calculating, the expression of a man who had planned for every contingency. "Who's going to believe you? The desperate woman who sold herself to save her son? Or the respectable businessman who's come to reclaim his family?" Sarah turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She found Logan in his study, speaking in low tones with Sheriff Holliday. The lawman's presence filled the room with the weight of justice and the promise of resolution. "Mrs. Connor," the sheriff touched his hat brim. "I understand you've had some concerns about Mr. Valentine's behavior. He's been tampering with my son's medication, making him sick to control my decisions. That's a serious accusation. Dr. Watson can confirm it. He's been wondering about the inconsistencies in John's treatment response." The sheriff nodded, his weathered face grave. "We'll need evidence. Something more than accusations." Logan moved to his desk and withdrew a small glass vial. "Vincent's been careless with his materials. Mrs. Danvers found this in his room." The vial contained a clear liquid that caught the lamplight. Sheriff Holliday examined it carefully, his expression growing darker. "This is ipecac. Small doses would cause the symptoms you've described." The evidence was damning, irrefutable. Vincent's careful planning had been undone by his own arrogance, his certainty that no one would dare challenge his authority. The arrest happened quietly, without drama or violence. Vincent accepted the handcuffs with the resigned dignity of a man who had played his cards and lost. As the sheriff led him away, he looked back at Sarah with something that might have been regret. "I really am his father." "No," Sarah replied, her voice steady as stone. "You're just the man who provided half his blood. Arthur was his father in every way that mattered." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same garden where Vincent had told her his lies, watching John play with a wooden horse Logan had carved for him. The boy's laughter rang clear and strong, no trace of the cough that had nearly claimed his life. Logan approached from the house, carrying 2 cups of coffee that steamed in the morning air. He handed one to Sarah and stood beside her, both of them content to watch John's simple joy. "The medical fund is approved." Logan's voice carried satisfaction. "No family in the territory will have to choose between dignity and their child's health. Arthur would have liked that." Yes, he would have. They had never spoken of love, but it lived in the spaces between their words, in the shared burden of protecting John and the quiet partnership they had built from desperate circumstances. Sarah had learned that love wasn't always passion and proclamation. Sometimes it was simply the decision to build something good from broken pieces. John ran to them, his face bright with health and happiness. He threw his arms around both of them, unconsciously creating the family portrait they had never planned, but somehow deserved. "Can we go to town today?" Elena said she has new penny candy at the store. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying across the desert air. We can go to town. The three of them walked toward the house together, their shadows stretching long across the ground. Behind them, the desert stretched endlessly toward mountains that no longer seemed impossible to cross. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.